So this is what happens when you add an extra chair. Everybody's confused about where to sit. I think you're in the home stretch. Most of you have been here all day. But this has been honestly incredible. I want to thank BEA, Elena, Sam, Tony, for allowing us to be a part of this. It is, there's no other place I'd rather be today. And I knew that coming in. I was like, I'm going to this event, and it feels like I am in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. And I hope you feel that way too, because this event has been that impactful for me. So as I was thinking about this panel and this topic, and my work over the last few decades, it's been focused on sort of investing in people and place, but not just any people, not just any community, those that are caught in the gap. I always have to stay connected to why I do this work, and it's work that's driven by my mother's experience, and it's for my daughter's future. That's why I do this work every single day. So, as Elena teased, we are in a moment. It is estimated that $84 trillion will be passed down from older Americans to their heirs in the next 20 years. That's a lot of money. 10 trillion of that in the next 10. Unsurprisingly, and especially given the conversation we've had today, the wealthiest 10% of households will give and receive the majority of that money, right? While the more diverse, sort of bottom 50% of households will account for only roughly 8% of that transfer. So we could spend a lot of time, and we have today, really talking about why that might be and how it might exacerbate inequality. But this is a solution summit, right? So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the why. We've done that. I want to talk about sort of what are the policies, what are the interventions, and how do we get a piece of that? How do we ensure that the Black community continues to accrue assets that can be passed down? And could this be a moment for us, for Black people, to accelerate Black economic prosperity for the next generation? So I am privileged to join three incredible leaders who have made it their life work to tear down barriers. They bring sort of a national and regional perspective, and they turn data and research into equity-centered policy and practice. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Darrick. Can you help us better understand the forces that are driving this wealth transfer, and particularly the role that our lovely tax system plays in that?
Thank you. And let me lead with gratitude as well. Gratitude for this panel, gratitude for the moderator, and for the Black Economic Alliance Solutions Summit. And I love that word, solutions, to focus on remedy. So to frame things, I guess we need to think about the ways in which wealth is created. Wealth begets more wealth, and it grows exponentially.
Money makes money.
It's also important to note that a white asset-based middle class didn't simply emerge, but it was public policy that generated that asset-based middle class. And what was problematic is that the ways the policies were designed, managed, and implemented, they were not racially inclusive. And I can give examples, but let me go first to the tax code. Right now, we have a tax code that favors existing wealth more so than creating new wealth. And we can think about things like the ways in which we tax wage income versus capital gains, the ways in which people are able to deduct interest payments for their mortgage. And it's not problematic that we have a tax system, which is our biggest fiscal tool, that privileges trying to create the economic security of wealth. What is problematic is to whom it's distributed. So the bottom 60% of earners get about less than 5% of a more than $600 billion dividend that comes about from this tax policy. We recently had the Trump tax cuts that were put in place, and we know that we're facing a scenario where those tax cuts are going to expire. Well, those tax cuts hastened it. So there were greater capital gains deductions. And then here's something else that might have been overlooked. The ways in which individuals were able to deduct taxes paid to their state and local authorities from their federal income tax, well, those types of deductions were reduced. So what you end up with is municipalities having to balance budgets, municipalities that often are more likely to employ workers of color than in a relative sense compared to the private sector, a so-called starve the beast scenario where in order to balance the budget, you have to turn the fines and fees of populations that are economically and politically vulnerable to fines and fees. So just to put a button on it, the wealth gap is grounded in history. It's grounded in a history where public policies, and I mean, we can go all the way back to slavery when black people were literally capital assets for a white landowning plantation class, but we need not even go that far back and discover from the New Deal and Great Society programs like the GI Bill, the restructuring of mortgage loans accompanying with things like redlining. They were implemented in such a way that we seeded a white asset-based middle class by doing things like providing capital for them to start a business, providing capital for a down payment for a home, or debt-free college educations to put them in managerial or professional occupations by which they could benefit from retirement services to that occupation class and generate wealth and pass it down from one generation to the next. And also, when black people were able to overcome circumstances and acquire wealth, that wealth never received the political codification that was afforded to white individuals. We have examples like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that massacre, where modicums of a middle-class society was destroyed overnight because they didn't have the protections, the property right protections that a white community would have had. So this can go on and on and on. Let me just add one last thing, and then I'll stop. And that is, even within generation, wealth grows exponentially. So the wealth gap, when you're young, will expand over time the ways in which wealth is compounded. So take, for instance, one demographic, and this is not going to be unique for black women. It would hold for black men too. But if you look at black women under the age of 30 who are college educated, they have negative wealth, and that's likely due to student loan debt. And the fact that they have student loan debt is probably grounded in the fact that generationally, the cost of education is more to them because they don't have parents that can afford college degrees. Well, that gap that starts when they're young, it manifests over time and will rise to about 81 times. If you look at a single white woman over the age of 60 compared to a single black woman over the age of 60, the wealth gap is pronounced to the tune of almost 81 times more wealth to that white woman. And that will have generational impacts. So, if you look at college degrees versus not college degrees, married versus not married, you will find pronounced wealth gaps throughout all those ways in which one can cut the data. And the reason why is that the main ingredient for building wealth is wealth itself. And the ways in which white people have gotten wealth relative to black people is public policy.
Okay. Thank you. It's interesting you mentioned Tulsa. You probably don't know this, I'm a Tulsa girl, born and raised. Not too far from where those riots occurred. And you can still see, if you visit Tulsa, it is still apparent where that occurred. Those communities have never recovered. Yeah. So Tawanna, I want to, a lot of your work is really sort of very much focused on sort of regional solutions. So I want to talk about what solutions exist for increasing Black generational wealth for today's generations. Like, what do we need to do to implement them?
Absolutely. So our work has really been focused on helping corporations and local governments, city, county, regional government authorities, not only learn more, but then take accountability for what they're learning by applying that through action in shared accountability with Black communities, meaning both workers and business owners and incumbent families. And I lift up maybe three kind of categories of solutions: education, investment, and accountability. In the education space today, we've spent a lot of time learning. I've heard people echoing out throughout the room, wait, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. One of the things that most business leaders, in addition to us, don't know is the wealth that was built, white wealth that was built from slavery forward. The wealth that was built not only by institutions, but also individuals, but we focus on that institutional wealth that was built to understand that any of the other solutions we throw out are not charity. They're not a handout, they're really paying back the wealth that was extracted out of our communities. One of the ways that we've gone about that we encourage others to do, is by taking executives on racial reckoning and truth and justice tours. Taking executives from both Minnesota, large corporations, CEOs, C-suite leaders, as well as in Detroit, on tours to help them really understand slavery, mass incarceration, Jim Crow, all the laws and policies that were just mentioned that have fed us to today. And specifically when we zero in by taking them to the Equal Justice Institute's Legacy Museum and other locations throughout the South, they're able to see, wait a minute, dollars that I'm trading on today started being built back then. Institutions that I highly recognize when I'm hiring people, wait, those institutions enslaved Black bodies and insured those Black bodies in order to duplicate their wealth and be in a position today to educate leaders. When they're able to understand that, then we take them back home to say, now, how do you hold yourself accountable for different actions, different investments because of what you've learned? Those investments, then I move there to look at how we're investing in Black-owned businesses. We've talked a lot about that today. We recognized in Minnesota that particularly Black women, again, opening businesses faster than anyone else, but many of those businesses that had survived that 10-year mark hadn't survived getting past more than $100,000 in annual revenues. Frankly, a sin. And so being the home of where George Floyd was murdered, being a place with more than most cities have for national headquarters, we recognize we've got a moment here to really focus on place and ensure that those corporations who made major supplier diversity commitments can do so in place, that Minnesota isn't the last place that they spend their dollars, but that means ensuring that those businesses are of size. So we've invested forgivable loans with those businesses ranging from $25,000 to $450,000, all with the focus on ensuring that those businesses are positioned to create jobs that pay family-sustaining wages. And what we've proved through that, with just a couple of years of investing about $2 million, is that all of those businesses created jobs that pay more than $30 an hour. All of them, because we focused on growth sectors, we focused on people who were successful, but had been uncapitalized. We've got a vendor whose products were on the shelves of Target, and she'd never gotten a bank loan, never gotten a CDFI loan. That's criminal. And so we've been able to prove that that works if we can invest there. Lastly, I'd say driving rooms like this. Often we're talking about what others can do, but we have Black folks with capital, social capital, political capital, financial capital that can be invested in our communities strategically. When we use our influence, our information, and our dollars to invest, to ensure that businesses end up in the corporate supply chain, not only of the places where we work, but the places where we spend our dollars, we start to accelerate the path that we can really create for sustainable change, wealth building, and generational wealth building.
That's incredible. That's incredible. All right.
Yes.
Raymond, you ready? So, I'm at AARP, so obviously we spend a lot of time talking about sort of older adults and how to help sort of the 50-plus age well. I'm curious from your perspective, what role do seniors play in molding this looming potential problem into a solution?
Well, I think we begin with recognizing the breadth and depth that the word seniors is pregnant with in our modern context. As I've shared with a couple of people, every day in America, 10,000 people reach the age of 65. It is a trend that began about 4 years ago and will continue until the year 2040. 10,000 people a day reaching the age of 65. Current census trends project that is between March and May of 2035 that for the first time in America's history, we'll have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. Yeah. And we begin to look at these trends. and model them out over 20 years, we see a markedly high representation of African American women in those trends over time. The second imperative is recognizing that our elders are not an issue to be managed or something to be cared for, but in fact, a vast asset that needs to be tapped into and employed. There are many Black elders who are immense holders of wealth, experience, networks that can be leveraged in this effort to bring real wealth to our communities. And so understanding the breadth and depth of the issue that is before us and recognizing that it is in fact an asset. And so one of the things that research says about the great wealth transfer is that women will have a greater proportion of that wealth than they ever have before. And that younger generations, and largely women as keepers of that wealth, will be more predisposed to invest in innovative solutions to the challenges that they see in the world than their foreparents were. And so one of the things that we should do is to pay particular attention to Black elders who are involved in entrepreneurial efforts that are responsive to many of the challenges that we see in the world today. For example, there's a sister in Washington, D.C., Elizabeth White, who has brought to market an innovative take on co-living spaces that addresses challenges and solutions, but is also a market-driven approach to addressing the issue. And there are a number of other of them that we need to be attentive to and make certain that as we look at these opportunities to provide access to capital and other critical elements that grow businesses and scale businesses, that we aren't ignoring the opportunities that exist in older populations. Secondly, I think Black elders must play a critical role in a radical redesign of the aging ecosystem that exists in our country. One that in large part looks to caretake and to make certain, forgive the morbidity, or the morbid tone, but making certain that people are well when they die. I would share with you, as we see this huge expanse in the aging population in our country, the system that supports them, that literally spends hundreds of millions of philanthropic and public dollars, needs to be repurposed in ways to ensure that economic mobility is a part of what it means to age in America, and that we are attentive to how people age well, not only in their health, but in their economic health. And so there is a radical redesign of the system. Lastly, I will say that Black elders can also be immense drivers of the social capital that has been referenced. There are vast networks and relationships. In addition, there are platforms and influence and credibility that resides in many Black elders in our communities that can actually be the sources of mobilizing communities and relationships in service to the agenda that is being lifted up by the Black Economic Alliance. And so simply put, Black elders are an untapped resource in the economic viability of our community.
Thank you. I mean, in some ways, you know, this is a country that has never sort of appreciated sort of age, right? We sort of value youth much more. And so I'm curious, just as a follow-up, like how do we start to lift up the riches that our Black elders have to give? Because we live in a culture and a society that doesn't quite see sort of older adults, regardless of age, of race, but older adults as sort of that asset, that rich asset that we need to sort of move us forward.
Well, I will share with you that is literally what I wake up every day to do with Aging While Black, is to build a national movement that recognizes the rich reservoir of talent and resource that exists in our Black elders. We put forth the notion that there are three critical pillars. One is recalibrating the village. We need to recognize that there has been a profound shift in our understanding of the village, and that it is currently the infrastructure that supports Black life is not currently structured in a way to actually happen, to deal with what has already begun to happen. But the second is making certain that our folks are really masterful when it comes to understanding the fundamentals of technology as it prepares them to live going forward. But the last is leaning into this spirit of Sankofa. How do we create the environments where this wisdom sharing can happen in reciprocal ways? Because we're missing out on a lot. We have experienced the retrenchment that is so stunning to many of the people in the room. This is a movie that has played before, and many of the older people in your neighborhoods have been to the show where it was shown.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and come back to you, Darrick. So in addition to being a thought leader and intergenerational strategies to increase Black generational wealth, you're a leading voice on baby bonds. So could you tell us what baby bonds are and how they can provide a forward-looking solution to inheritance inequality?
So the idea is simple,
Yeah.
And again, grounded in the notion that it is wealth that begets wealth. Financial literacy, important, valuable, useful, but it is very limited if you have no capital to manage in the first place. So baby bonds is a birthright to capital. Baby bonds ensures that everyone born will have a set-aside reserve for when they become a young adult that they can use towards some asset-enhancing endeavor like a down payment on a home, finance for a debt-free college education, or some seed capital to start a business. It is not so novel, it's grounded in history. Yeah. This is how wealth has been created in the past, in different forms, but this is how it's been created in the past. It has the attribute of being an automatic stabilizer. So as consider this generation that went through, a younger generation, millennials, they went through the Great Recession, then the pandemic recession, no fault to their own. They faced calamities, but if you had something like baby bonds in effect, regardless of generation, the state will reserve a set aside, similar to Social Security as we deal with aging populations, a set aside reserve, some capital finance so that you too can have the benefits of wealth. And then I'm just going to say some things really quick in response. Without a doubt, our most treasured assets are people, and Black people obviously make up people and are treasured assets. Without a doubt, these policies shouldn't be thought of as charity, but rather investments in our productive capacities. So not only did we yield a white asset-based middle class, we created a dynamic economic society with innovations that we otherwise would not have had, although we excluded Black people, where America grew, had fast growth rates, and that growth was done in an egalitarian way. So we had fast growth rates, and we had real wages growing in lockstep with productivity. Again, Black people were excluded, so the lesson is to have affirmative inclusion. But here's the perhaps controversial statement I'll make. The racial wealth gap is dramatic, and there's nothing en masse that Black people can do collectively beyond organizing with regards to politics to ensure that government is seeding us with the capital we need in order to generate wealth. That to me is almost a stylized fact, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do all the things that we desire to do, including invest in Black businesses, because that does build collective efficacy. But in the end, the sobering news is that it has to be through political organizing that we facilitate the public policies in order to generate wealth and reduce the racial wealth gap.
So we are sort of over time, but I always want to end with sort of a message of hope. So I'll reserve this one for Raymond and Tawanna. I'd just love to hear from you why we should have or view the great wealth transfer as hopeful.
So I think we can't help but view it as hopeful. To the point that has been raised by both of my colleagues here, everything that we need, we have. It's in our DNA, it's in our history, and the more that we're able to leverage that to propel our communities forward, the better. And I see more and more of us stepping out of that space of feeling a need to prove and seeing an opportunity to perform in every domain that we're perfectly capable of doing so. And that creates more opportunities to knock those walls down. And frankly, the next couple of generations, my children, are declared that they'll be both physicians and attorneys and entrepreneurs building jobs and creating that. But that's because of the people they've been exposed to who make that a reality for them.
Yeah, that's excellent.
It's an opportunity because it is a period of major disruption. Regardless to how orchestrated many would like for the transfer to be. It is a moment of huge disruption, and so it is an opportunity for us to be strategic and to change the direction of some of the things that are happening.
Beautiful. Well, with that, Tawanna, Darrick, Raymond, thank you so much.
Thank you.